90 days to a better life, or the worst decision he ever made. He never believed that 90 days could permanently change a human being. On the night he made the decision, everything looked almost peaceful. The room was quiet. The light was warm. His phone rested in his hand, glowing with a message that promised a way out. Not wealth, not luxury, just a chance at a normal life. Work first, papers later. Endure a little now so you can breathe later. That's what everyone said. He had heard it too many times to count. Around him, life had stalled. Endless work for almost nothing. Bills that never stopped coming. Dreams postponed until they quietly disappeared. He wasn't lazy, and he wasn't reckless. He was simply tired of surviving instead of living. That night, staring at a small travel bag on the floor, he felt something close to relief. Inside the bag were a few clothes, his documents, and some cash. Everything else, memories, routines, the life he knew, was left behind without ceremony. The first days of the journey felt deceptively easy. Buses, waiting rooms, unfamiliar cities flashing past windows, faces that looked just as tired and determined as his own. People spoke carefully, choosing words like they might break something fragile. Nobody asked too many questions. Everyone understood why they were there. Hope hung in the air, quiet but powerful. The kind of hope that pushes people forward without asking for proof. By the 10th day, exhaustion had set in. Not in his body, but in his mind. Instructions came in fragments. Routes changed without explanation. New contacts replaced old ones overnight. People appeared, guided them, then vanished as if they had never existed. Slowly, he began to realize that his life had become part of a system he didn't control. He was no longer a person making choices. He was someone following directions. They kept saying the same word: soon. Soon the border, soon the work, soon the documents. Soon things would get easier. The word started to feel hollow. When something is always coming soon, it usually means it's still very far away. Around the 15th day, fear arrived quietly. Not panic, not terror, just a cold awareness that settled deep in his chest. He overheard conversations about people who hadn't made it this far. No details, no emotions. Just facts spoken without weight. Someone got sick. Someone ran out of money. Someone disappeared during the night. The way they talked about it scared him more than the stories themselves, as if loss had become normal. He learned quickly that thinking too much was dangerous. Questions slowed you down. Doubt weakened you. The only way forward was to focus on the next step, the next instruction, the next day. Turning back wasn't an option anymore, not because it was impossible, but because it would mean admitting that everything he had risked meant nothing. Days blurred together. Sleep came in short, restless bursts. Meals were irregular. Conversations became shorter, more practical. He noticed how quickly people changed under pressure. Kindness turned into caution. Trust turned into calculation. Everyone was watching everyone else, not out of cruelty, but out of survival. Sometimes he stared at his own hands and felt disconnected from them, as if his body was moving forward while his mind lagged behind. That was when he understood why people keep going, even when everything inside them is screaming to stop. Going forward requires effort. Going back requires courage. By the 30th day, the journey no longer felt like travel. It felt like a test. Weather, fatigue, hunger, fear, all layered together. Tempers shortened. Silences grew longer. The group around him became less human and more mechanical. Nobody spoke about the future anymore. The only goal was to get through today. Somewhere along the way, he crossed a line he couldn't see, a mental border. On the other side of it, he was quieter, harder, less trusting. He stopped imagining the life he was chasing and focused only on avoiding mistakes. Because one mistake, he realized, could erase everything. On the 40th day, something happened. Nothing dramatic, no shouting, no chaos. Just a decision made too fast and a person who didn't continue the journey. Nobody explained. Nobody asked questions. People looked away and moved on. That moment changed something inside him. For the first time, he asked himself a question he had been avoiding since day one. What if the better life isn't waiting at the end of the road? What if the worst decision was already made the moment he left? The answer wouldn't come today. And that was the most frightening part. By the 45th day, time had stopped behaving normally. Mornings arrived without rest. Nights ended before sleep felt real. His body kept moving, but his thoughts lagged behind, like they were struggling to catch up with what he had already done. The idea of 90 days no longer sounded like a plan. It sounded like a sentence. They reached a place that wasn't marked on any map he had ever seen. An industrial edge of a city where warehouses stood silent and streets felt unfinished, like they were abandoned halfway through construction. This, they were told, was temporary. Just a pause, a place to wait. Waiting had become the most exhausting part of everything. Work started the next morning. No contracts, no explanations, just tasks. Heavy, repetitive, unforgiving. Long hours under supervision that didn't feel violent, but didn't feel human either. People watched closely, not to help, but to make sure no one slowed down. Payment was mentioned, but never discussed in detail. He noticed that nobody complained anymore. Complaining required energy they no longer had. What surprised him wasn't the work itself. It was how quickly his standards changed, how fast he stopped expecting fairness, how easily temporary began to feel permanent. Each night he told himself the same thing. This is the price. This is what I chose. Endure now, live later. Repeating it felt necessary, like a ritual to keep regret from growing too loud. He started noticing small things about the people around him. A man who spoke to himself quietly during breaks. Someone who counted days on a torn piece of cardboard. Another who avoided eye contact completely, as if looking at others might remind him of who he used to be. These weren't criminals. They weren't reckless thrill seekers. They were ordinary people who had run out of options. Around the 50th day, rumors began to circulate. Quiet ones, careful ones, about inspections, about sudden changes in rules, about people being moved overnight to places no one returned from. Nobody knew what was true. But fear doesn't need facts to spread. It only needs silence. One evening, someone asked a simple question. When do the papers come? The room went quiet. Too quiet. The person supervising them paused, then answered calmly that things take time. Trust the process. The words sounded rehearsed, practiced, like they had been used many times before. That night, sleep didn't come at all. He lay awake, replaying every decision that had brought him here. Not the big ones, but the small ones. The moment he ignored a doubt. The moment he believed a promise without proof. The moment he told himself that millions had done this before, so he would be fine. That was when he understood something uncomfortable. Most bad decisions don't feel dangerous when you make them. They feel reasonable. By day 55, the first real crack appeared. Someone tried to leave. Not dramatically, no shouting, just packed their things and didn't show up for work. By evening, they were back. Silent, shaken. Nobody asked where they had gone. Nobody needed to. The message was clear without words. The idea of freedom changed after that. It stopped meaning borders and documents. It became about choice, about being able to say no. And that was when he realized how little choice he actually had left. His phone, once a lifeline, had become useless. Limited battery. No signal most of the time. Messages unanswered. Home felt like a different world now, one that continued without him. He wondered if people there still imagined him chasing a dream, unaware of what each day actually demanded. On the 60th day, he received money for the first time. Less than expected. Much less. Enough to survive, not enough to escape. He stared at the cash for a long time, feeling something close to betrayal, but unsure who had betrayed him. The people here? Or the version of himself who had believed this would end differently? He started counting the days backward. 30 left, then 29. Each number felt heavier than the last. The closer he got to 90, the more afraid he became, because deep down, he knew something was wrong with the promise itself. If everything was supposed to change at 90 days, why did no one ever talk about what happened after? That question followed him into sleep for the first time in weeks. And when he woke up, he realized he was no longer counting days with hope. He was counting them like warnings. By the 65th day, he stopped telling himself stories. No more promises about how everything would make sense in the end. No more imagining the moment he would call home with good news. Reality had stripped those habits away. What remained was routine. And routine is dangerous because it teaches you how to endure almost anything. The work didn't change, but he did. His movements became automatic. He learned when to speak and when silence was safer. He learned how to look busy, even when exhausted, how to hide pain behind efficiency. Survival had its own language, and he was fluent now. One afternoon, during a rare break, he overheard two supervisors talking. They weren't whispering, just careless. One mentioned that another group had reached their 90 days last month. The other laughed quietly and said 90 days doesn't mean what people think it means. The sentence landed heavily in his chest. He didn't ask questions. He didn't react. But something inside him tightened. That night he lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine that the 90 days might not be a finish line. They might be a filter, a way to see who breaks, who stays, who becomes useful enough to keep. The thought terrified him, not because it was dramatic, but because it felt logical. Around him, people were changing faster now. Short tempers, sudden arguments over nothing, small misunderstandings that turned sharp. Stress was finding cracks. Someone broke down during work, crying without sound, tears streaming while their hands kept moving. Nobody stopped. Nobody could afford to. On the 70th day, something unexpected happened. An inspection. Vehicles arrived early in the morning. Uniforms. Serious faces. Everyone was told to line up. The air felt thick with fear. This was the moment everyone dreaded and hoped for at the same time. Dreaded because it could mean detention. Hoped for because it could mean recognition, legality, a way out. He stood still, heart pounding, documents clutched tightly. Questions were asked, names checked, faces studied. When it was his turn, the official looked at him for a second longer than necessary. Long enough to make him think something was wrong. Then they moved on. No explanation, no reaction. The inspection ended without incident. No one was taken away. No one was helped either. When the vehicles left, the silence they left behind was worse than fear. It confirmed what many had started to suspect. This system wasn't hidden. It was tolerated. After that day, hope didn't disappear. It transformed. It became quieter, more cautious. Dangerous hope gets you hurt. Careful hope keeps you alive. He started thinking differently, not about finishing the 90 days, but about what came after if nothing changed. By the 75th day, he noticed something else. New people were arriving, fresh faces, the same eyes he once had. Tired, hopeful, nervous. Watching them felt uncomfortable, like looking into a mirror from the past. He wanted to warn them, but didn't know how without breaking rules that weren't written anywhere. One evening, a man he had worked beside for weeks didn't return. This time, There were no rumors, no explanations, just an empty space where someone used to be. The absence felt loud. It made the 90-day promise feel smaller, weaker, like it was never meant to protect anyone. As day 80 approached, the number began to haunt him. 10 days left. A countdown that once felt empowering now felt threatening. What happens when the number reaches 0? Does someone knock on the door? Does a decision get made? Or does nothing happen at all? He asked himself a question he had avoided for a long time. If nothing changes at 90 days, would he stay? The answer scared him because it wasn't a clear no. He had survived this long. Leaving meant risk. Staying meant certainty. And certainty, even when painful, can be comforting. On the 82nd day, he was called aside. Nothing dramatic, just told to wait after work. His stomach tightened. Waiting had never meant anything good. He sat alone in a small room, listening to sounds outside, voices, footsteps, doors opening and closing. When someone finally entered, they didn't threaten him. They didn't shout. They spoke calmly. They said he was doing well, that he was reliable, that people like him were needed. The words felt like praise but carried weight. An offer without paperwork. Stability without freedom? He was told to think about it. There were 8 days left. As he walked back to where he slept, his thoughts raced. This was the moment the journey had been building toward. Not legality, not rescue, but a choice disguised as opportunity.
And for the first time since the journey began, he realized something chilling.
The worst decision might not be the one he already made. It might be the one he was about to make next. The next morning felt heavier than all the others combined. 8 days left. The number repeated in his head like a warning signal that wouldn't shut off. He moved through the routine on autopilot, but everything felt different now. Every instruction carried hidden meaning. Every look felt measured. The offer from the night before sat in his chest, quiet but crushing. He realized that this was how the system worked. It didn't force people to stay. It made staying feel safer than leaving. It waited until you were tired enough, worn enough, grateful enough for stability that you stopped asking what it cost. During work, he caught himself watching the newer arrivals again. They still whispered about plans, about what they would do when things finally worked out. He envied them and pitied them at the same time. They still believed the story. He now understood the structure behind it. Later that day, someone he trusted quietly warned him. Not directly, just a sentence spoken while passing. Think carefully. People who accept don't leave. The words were calm, not dramatic. That made them more frightening. No anger, no bitterness, just fact. By the 85th day, tension spread through the place like static. Everyone close to 90 was watching everyone else. Some looked hopeful, others looked resigned. A few looked empty, as if the decision had already been made for them. That night, he finally used his phone again. One bar of signal appeared briefly, like a mistake. He didn't waste time. He opened an old message thread. Home. He typed a short sentence, then erased it. Typed again. Erased again. What do you say when the truth sounds unbelievable? When admitting regret feels like failure?
He sent nothing. The signal vanished. The silence returned. The next day, another inspection came. Smaller, quicker, almost casual. The kind that pretends everything is normal. It confirmed what he already suspected. Nobody was coming to save them. This wasn't a secret operation. It was an open one that lived in the space between laws, protected by indifference. On day 87, he was called in again. This time, the tone was firmer. The offer was repeated, clearer now. Longer hours, better pay, more responsibility. Still no papers, still no timeline. Just trust. He was told he had until day 90 to decide. Walking back, he felt strangely calm. The fear had burned itself out. What remained was clarity. He finally understood the moral weight of his situation. No one had tricked him at the beginning. The information had always been incomplete, but the choice had been his. He remembered why he left in the first place. Not for wealth, not for shortcuts, but for dignity. For the ability to look at his life and feel that it belonged to him. Somewhere along the road, that reason had gotten lost. On the 88th day, something unexpected happened. One person refused the offer openly. No shouting, no drama. Just a quiet refusal. The reaction was immediate, not violent, administrative, efficient. By nightfall, their space was empty. Their name stopped being spoken. That moment answered every remaining question. The final night arrived quietly. Day 89. The air felt thick with anticipation. Everyone close to the deadline slept badly, if at all. He sat alone, thinking about 90 days ago, about the room, the bag, the message on his phone. He realized how much easier hope had been back then. Morning came. Day 90. No announcement, no ceremony. Just another workday. That was the final twist. The promise that had driven everything simply dissolved into routine. The number reached 0, and nothing changed. Later that day, he was asked one last time, stay or leave. This time, the choice was real, and the consequences would be permanent. He didn't answer right away. The room was quiet, but not empty. Years of unspoken expectations filled the air. This was the moment everything narrowed down to a single decision. Not the journey, not the suffering, not the promises. Just this. Stay meant stability without identity. Food, shelter, routine. A life that functioned but never truly moved forward. Leave meant uncertainty, risk, fear, but also the possibility of reclaiming something he had slowly lost along the way. Himself. He asked a simple question. What happens if I say no? The response was calm, almost polite. You'll be moved somewhere else. No details, no guarantees. The kind of answer that sounds reasonable until you realize it's designed to stop you from asking anything more. He thought about all the small compromises that had brought him here. None of them felt disastrous at the time. Each one made sense on its own. That was the most dangerous part. Illegal journeys don't begin with desperation. They begin with logic, with arguments that sound responsible, with choices that feel temporary. He said no. There was no reaction, no anger, no argument, just a nod, a note written down, instructions given. That was it. His 90 days ended not with freedom, but with movement again. That night, he packed his bag for the second time in 3 months. It was lighter now. Not because he owned less, but because he understood more. He didn't know where he was being sent. He didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time since he left home, the direction felt like it was his again. The transfer happened before sunrise. A small group. No conversation. The road stretched out in front of them, familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. This wasn't a rescue. It wasn't a victory. It was simply another chance to choose differently. Days later, he found himself in a place that didn't promise miracles. Work was still hard, Life was still uncertain. But there were rules, limits, a sense that time here actually moved forward instead of looping endlessly. The difference was subtle, but profound. He thought often about the people he left behind. Some had stayed. Some would stay forever. Not because they were weak, but because they were tired. The system thrived on that tiredness. It didn't need to lock doors. It only needed to make the outside feel more dangerous than the inside. He learned something important from those 90 days. Illegal migration isn't just about borders or laws. It's about hope being slowly reshaped into obedience. About people trading long-term dignity for short-term survival. About systems that don't need cruelty to function, only patience. When he finally spoke to his family again, he didn't tell them everything. Not yet. He just said he was alive. That he was working, that he was trying again, but differently this time. The relief in their voices reminded him why he had started this journey in the first place. Not to disappear, but to belong. Looking back, he no longer called the 90 days a mistake. He called them a warning. A lesson written in exhaustion, fear, and quiet moments of truth. A reminder that the worst decisions are often the ones that feel safest in the moment. For anyone watching this story, there's one thing worth remembering. If a path demands that you give up your voice, your choices, or your identity in exchange for survival, the price is already too high. No opportunity should require you to disappear to earn it. 90 days can change a life, but not always in the way you expect. If this story made you think, pause, or question the choices people are forced to make every day, stay with us. Subscribe to the channel, because there are many more real stories like this that need to be told.